Something, yeah, rebuilding and adding gates, hey. Are we good to go? Okay. Good evening. Like to call the regular meeting of the Mills River Planning Board to order. And let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, before we go to the approval of the agenda, I believe we have an item to add. And if it please the board, I would like to add that first so we can talk about that. Rather than come in and after the old business, I'd like to go ahead and talk about that and get that taken care of.
Sure. So yeah, staff is adding a last minute text amendment 2401. So per the chair's request, we'll do that as new business A, and then you'd prefer new business before old business.
I would, that way
Okay.
we can talk about it, and then whatever time we have left, we'll go back into the old business.
And then lastly, before we move to approval of the minutes, so after this item, approval of the agenda, the town manager had an announcement he would want to make to the board.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. Would someone be willing to?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have Mr. Foster and Mr. Cole, seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
The minutes?
A second.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. As you may have heard through the grapevine, I have resigned my position with the town of Mills River. So I wanted to come and just officially make that announcement to the board. I've enjoyed working with all of you over the last few years. Some of you more than others, in terms of length of service, not whether I like working with you. I came out badly. Anyway, been with the town for about 4.5 years, and I've really enjoyed it. It's a great place to live, great place to work. I've got a great staff here. Gonna miss everyone. I'm gonna be the new town manager for the town of Granite Falls, North Carolina, which is just about 10 minutes north of Hickory on 321. So if you know anybody looking to sell a house before it goes on the market, I'd love to talk to them because things move fast down there. So thank you. I just wanted to make that announcement officially, and happy. If you have any questions, otherwise I'll hit the road. Granite Falls, North Carolina. Granite Falls. It's between Hickory and Lenoir. Been down that road before. Yep.
Well, you're not too far away to come back and visit.
Nope, not at all. It's only about an hour and a half from here, so I won't be far. Thank you. Likewise. Thank you. All right. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Give me one moment to pull that up. All right, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. Normally we don't add last minute text amendments to the agenda, but staff was doing some research this week on the mixed use zoning code and found a bit of an inconsistency that we wanted to address in a timely manner. I'm just gonna read through my staff report, just put this in the record. So again, while researching the mixed-use zoning code, staff discovered there is no residential density requirement that would apply for a development with multiple detached single-family homes on a single parcel under single ownership, again, in mixed use. So we're not talking about a traditional subdivision with lots, because mixed use allows more than one building or home on one parcel of land. So again, due to the inconsistency of a higher density single-family development with our comp plan, we immediately informed the town manager, who authorized us to start the text amendment and bring this before you tonight. So again, what is in the code now is under 154.066A, minimum residential lot size. So there's a stipulation that residential lot sizes shall be no less than 30,000 square feet per single family dwelling. But again, the mixed use district is exempt from our requirements. Normally you only have one house on one parcel. That's not the case with mixed use. With mixed use, you can have multiple houses or multiple principal buildings or even principal uses on one parcel. So again, you could come in, put 10 houses on 5 acres, let's say, and as our ordinance is currently written, that would not trigger any density requirement, because it's right now it's just based on lot size. So again, if there's no subdivision of land, we can't enforce the minimum lot size requirements, and there's no additional guidance in the ordinance currently, because again, there are no dimensional requirements for residential developments. There are no setbacks for homes of a residential nature in mixed use. So again, included as attachment A is just a little bit of language we added, clarifying that Mills residential density in mixed use shall not exceed one dwelling unit per 30,000 square feet of land for detached single family dwellings. This is not a change in how we've enforced the regulations. This was our understanding that this was the rule. But again, sometimes you get down into the nitty gritty aspects of the code and you find something like this. So we wanted to kind of close this loophole as quickly as possible. We did not apply that density to multifamily developments and those other ones, because of course they're allowed per our other ordinances up to 4 units an acre. And then there's one little sentence on the second page of attachment A that just talks about uses needing to secure a zoning compliance permit. We also found some inconsistency in the code about whether uses even need to be permitted. Obviously, we've been permitting and issuing zoning permits in mixed use for quite some time. So again, just trying to do a quick administrative correction in the code to clarify these items. Attachment B just has the 2 sections of the code that show that mixed use is exempt from that single principal building or use on a lot. And then, like any text amendment, attachment C is your draft statement of consistency. Obviously, staff's recommending approval because this is highly consistent with, preserving the character of town in those areas. That's really the gist of it. I'm happy to take any questions from the board.
So the way it's written now, so and they want to have single family dwelling units on that. Without subdividing, not really a limit.
That's correct.
So
Exactly right. So, I mean, we've gotten some interest lately about for rent developments in the town. So again, not multifamily like the townhomes, because again, that's another for rent development, but a single family detached development. And that's when we kind of dug into the code a little more and found that if there is no subdivision of land and there is no minimum lot size requirement, there is nothing we can hold someone to. Now, again, staff's understanding and how I trained Kevin and how I was trained with, when I first came here, was that there's this town-wide residential density requirement. But like we kind of talked with the mixed use discussion, it is identified by zoning district. So you go through neighborhood commercial, it says minimum lot size 30,000 square feet, density 30,000 square feet per dwelling. Because mixed use has no residential setbacks or limitations like that, it's not included. And honestly, was probably just an oversight from way back when. But you're right, there's the possibility that someone could come in now, let's say put 20 houses on 5 acres at 4 units an acre. And as long as they are able to prove they can serve those houses with utilities, we would have to issue the approval.
So with the 4 per acre, would that stand, or could it be 5 or 6 per acre?
No, there's no suggestion of changing any density beyond what's already allowed. So again, it's just closing this loophole and making sure it's consistent that, you know, every other zoning district, MR30, neighborhood commercial that allows single family, we've always had the standing regulation, and it is in those zoning districts that it's 1 dwelling per 30,000 square feet, both for lot size and density across an entire parcel. So if you've got 5 acres divided by 30,000 square feet, 0.69 acres, that's the number of dwellings you can get. The 4 units an acre, again, is allowed for multifamily, tiny home parks, park model parks, RV parks, and then manufactured home parks. But that's included in the other sections of our zoning code. So again, we're just saying here, clarifying that single family detached is 1 per 30,000, but that does not apply to those special development types that are allowed to go up to 4 units an acre.
They allow accessory dwellings. I know that's another conversation. That will not be allowed.
Correct. So we don't even have a definition in our code of what an accessory dwelling is. So if someone wants to build an accessory dwelling like a cottage apartment for their aging parents, we have to treat that as a regular single family dwelling, and the property has to meet that density requirement. So it doesn't matter if the home's 2,500 square feet and the accessory dwelling is 500 square feet, it's still a dwelling. No, this was literally discovered yesterday.
Good idea. I'm glad you called.
Yeah.
Yep.
We have a motion to approve this text amendment and EXT 24-01 mixed use residential. Have a second.
I'll say.
Do we have any discussion before we vote?
Aye.
Mr. Ralston, aye.
Before we move on, the statement of consistency.
For the statement of consistency, for text 24-01, it's pursuant to the North Carolina General Statute 160D-604, Section D. Falls River Planning Board finds that the proposed text amendment is consistent with the following elements of the town's Making Falls River 4040 comprehensive plan and recommends approval of text amendment EXT-24-01. And I'm not going to read each objective, but 1.1, area work. Basically, manage growth to meet the goals of the comprehensive plan and provide for efficient use of land to accommodate new development. 1.4, consistent and updated code and ordinances, zoning and land development regulations. 2.3, appropriate residential lot size limits. Is there a motion to accept planning board statement of consistency.
A motion that we accept the statement of consistency.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Read that here. There. Okay. Now, we will move back to old business. Continue discussion of the mixed-use Mill River zoning and future land use map, rural residential category.
All right, thanks. So it's been a couple meetings now we've talked about mixed use, and when we left the last meeting, what we heard from the planning board members is that there was a request for additional information about allowed uses in the county zoning districts or low density districts. So again, R2, R2R, and R3. And then also looking at the number of properties less than an acre in the southern part of town, which could be impacted again if we were to lower density, from 1 unit per 30,000 to 1 unit per acre or 1 unit per 1.5 acres. And then I know Mr. Cole also had the request about corridor overlay districts. So I'll just report on those briefly. Kevin Webb, our planning technician, did the research on the county zoning districts. So after I go through this, I'll hand it over to him to kind of go through those details and summarize it for you. Let's touch on the parcels first. So we sorted through the parcel data from our tax collector and found that out of 4,100 parcels in the town, there's about 368 in the southern part of town that are 1 acre or smaller. So that's about 8.9 or 9% of all parcels in the town. That does include some extremely small parcels like 0.06 acres that was probably cut off when Boylston Highway came in. So again, not all of those are developable, but that is the number we came up with. And again, when looking at the southern part of town, we've kind of defined that for this discussion's purposes as the intersection of Schoolhouse, Turnpike, and Boylston going south. So again, that's the number of properties that could be affected, again, if we were to raise residential density above 1 unit an acre. And then for the corridor overlay district, let me pull up the general statute here. It's really quite broad and open what you can apply in an overlay district. And the general statutes basically say overlay districts are allowed to have regulations in which different requirements are imposed on certain properties within one or more underlying districts. So the regulations, most of the times what you see the regulations, or there are extra regulations or stricter regulations beyond the base district. So again, in some of our conversations, we had talked about using the boundary of the overlay to maybe keep that area mixed use, but also see if we wanted to amend the overlay district to maybe include some other density requirements, limitations of uses allowed. That's all permissible under state law. And then again, we went through all the county zoning districts. So again, I think those are included as attachments A through D. The R40 was the last district I didn't include. And then just like before, we also included the zoning district density chart as attachment E. And I'll turn that over to Kevin to summarize the findings on that for you.
Good evening. How's everybody doing? All right, so staff, we compiled a document of permitted uses from Henderson County's zoning ordinance. You see in attachment A starting, we have 4 residential zoning districts, R2, R2R, R3, and R40. R2, R2R, and R3 were in a permitted use chart. They were compiled from a permitted use chart from the county zoning ordinance. R40 was separate from that, had its own list of permitted uses. So if you look at attachment A, you'll see that there's a legend for each of the types of uses, including a breakdown of how the uses are set up. So you have residential uses, assessor uses. If there's an S next to the use, it's a special use permit process. P for permitted use, meaning it's permitted by right. NP, not permitted. And if it has an asterisk by it, no additional standards apply, which is interesting that only 10 of the uses listed didn't have additional standards applied. Most of these uses, almost all of them, have additional standards for the county zoning ordinance. And if the text is highlighted in yellow, there is a different in uses and or permitting process between R2, R2R, and R3. So I'm going to give you an overview of R2 real quick. R2 is a low to medium density residential district with some minor non-residential uses that allow for the continuation of non-residential uses prior to the county ordinances for the zoning district. One thing to note too is that in this district, single-wide manufactured homes are not permitted. Mobile homes are not permitted, which I found interesting. If you go to R2R, attachment B, also these are 1 unit an acre, R2 and R2R, 2 units an acre for multifamily. R2R allows for low to medium density residential development and light industrial and rural commercial development. Density up is 1 unit per acre. There are no restrictions on manufactured homes or mobile homes. One thing to note is in R2R and R3, there are allowances for smaller industrial buildings or uses. So if you look at, let's see. If you look at manufacturing and industrial uses, R2R and R3 allow machining and assembly operations and manufacturing production operations that are less than 10,000 square feet of gross floor area via the special use permit process. Let's see. R3 is the lowest density zoning district with 1 unit per 1.5 acres for residential density with no multifamily allowed. Commercial and non-residential development is very minimal. No retail uses are permitted, or if there is, it's very minimal. And then attachment D was separate from attachments A through C in terms of it wasn't in the permitted use chart. So R40 is Henderson County's a state residential district. There's 1 unit per 40,000 square feet, or 2 units per 40,000 square feet for multifamily. Minimum lot size is 40,000 square feet. It's a low density residential district, strictly for single family dwellings. And typically no industrial operations are permitted. So that's all I got.
Sure.
This may be a little out of order. All this. I would like to, well, I realize we won't finish tonight by any means, but I would like to see all of this. rooming, boarding. Wind turbine. Years ago. Wind turbine. Ready to use it. Communication, communication facility, not food.
I think it's just a cell tower, like a communications tower, a cell phone tower. Oh, that's possible. Hmm.
Yeah, probably some areas we would want to say. But I don't have the time with you. Yes. We go throughout. We don't want to talk. Random.
I have a certain amount of property and want to give my kids some property and they can't afford to build a house. If it's in the appropriate district where it's allowed, stopgap measures, still live in Mills River might be, a single wide. Say that from experience, because when I first got out there, of course, couldn't afford to build a house. This is before Mills River was Mills River. We lived in it for about 3 years before we built our house. Still, that's one of the things I would be a little hesitant to strike out totally. So yeah, I think we need to think about what would help people stay in Mills River. People in Mills River. That is a way, and it's an appropriate location, appropriate use. Them, I say that's the one thing I always say. Any discussion?
Yeah, when we discussed, and we was rewriting mobile home ordinance several years. But single wide.
I don't know those details off the top of my head. There is a difference of the mobile homes are any manufactured housing built to federal codes pre-1976. And
New mobile home. Single run. Mobile home park. But that's really.
and
You know,
in state law, I'm just saying allows those types of requirements. So a lot of communities that do allow single wide manufactured housing or even double wide manufactured housing sometimes they have pitched roof requirements, sometimes they have skirting requirements, so that's not out of the norm.
One thing I noticed would be a commercial shooting range. I have firearms and I love to hunt, shoot too, but I'd rather it be somewhere like on the edge of the national forest or something and not. I think that'd be a big problem here, a residential area.
So these are just examples of what Henderson County has.
Exactly, so
Okay.
the thought with this is so you can look at these uses, and if we want to mirror or use these as an example for possible future zoning districts for this part of town, because again, we're talking about possibly lower residential density, but also limiting the uses. This is just a starting point for the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are these bullet points literally just lifted from the ordinance? There's no other definitions beyond this bullet point? I mean, I don't want to read all the definitions. I'm just curious.
So, there's a permitted use chart, for each of the zoning districts, and, how I compiled the information was just pulling that information off. I can look for
No, I don't.
definitions.
No,
sure
I can go do that. I was just curious because I thought.
it's pretty thorough, yeah.
It's a lot of bullet points in lieu of that. So the question I have is, you said 8.9 or 9.8, I don't remember the math, but 1%, 1 acre or less south of, in all of the rural residential or all of the mixed use? I'm sorry,
So I think in our discussion last time we had, and let me just bring up this map real quick. So again, we had looked at this map, which identifies the area of inconsistency. So this is where mixed use and rural residential future land use overlap. Then we looked at this map, which was again focusing on the southern part of town, and again, the red being the outline of the corridor overlay district properties in that inconsistent area in the southern part of town. So I think from what I heard last time was possibly using this area as the starting point for a part of town that could have maybe more uses allowed. I'm not saying mixed use, but again, maybe a mixed use district with an actual use chart saying what's permitted and not. And then possibly outside of that is where we look at doing, I think I think I called it MRRA, Mills River Rural Agricultural, where you have one house per acre or one house per 1.5 acres.
So my question was, if we move forward and 1.5 acre was the minimum lot size, and so anything less than that, that means that someone couldn't put a dwelling on there if there's no dwelling on there now, or?
Correct. You could write something into the code. So right now, the way the ordinance is written is that if you have a lot that is below the town's minimum requirements, but the lot was created before the town existed, it's exempt or grandfathered in.
Okay.
So if you wanted to, you could include that in this type of an ordinance, but use a different start date. Instead of the town's incorporation, you could say, well, we changed zoning on the southern part of town on this date,
Right.
and any parcel
ways
subdivided before that would be allowed to be developed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there are ways to take that into consideration.
Mm-hmm. Again, knowing that there's no public utilities, there will have to be well and septic, and there will have to be some amount of property needed to get a developable house with private utilities on it.
To me, the discussion has been, or the gist of the discussion has been, and it's in the verbiage here, maintaining the rural nature of Mills River, right? And that is density and use. And there are competing forces, right? Competing, I have children too, and land and that sort of thing as well. And so, but how do you solve that issue at the same time that you try to keep, Mills River rural? Because I don't know, smaller lot size or existing lot size that isn't keeping it rural or affordable. Actually, it's not doing either of those right now. So, and the developments at the northern end of South Mills River are a testament to that. And so, So I don't know if you can do all things. So what's the priority? You know, is it the rural nature of Mills River? Is it affordable housing? What is it? And then usage is just so wide open, it's scary. So that needs to be addressed as well. But I'm not sure how to proceed. I get, my concern is, you know, there's some beautiful land in South Mills River. And unless we, you know, unless we enact something sooner rather than later on density, it's going to, you know, again, kind of spoil the rural nature of Mills River. But there are, you know, there's discussions that have to be had, and it won't be quick. And so one thought that I have, and I know this has been done in the town of Mills River in the past, and that is some leeway, a moratorium of 90 days to 180 days or whatever, so that we can have a debate without having to rush into something because we're concerned that 100 acres or 200 acres or 50 acres is going to get developed just under trying to keep it rural. So, so I think we need to consider that.
Right.
Got a question about a corridor, and I think we discussed it, and I've asked before, but the corridor that we show now shows individual parcel property boundaries. Would there be, a thought of just making a corridor that's 1,000 feet off of the road? Piece of property where some of that property is in the corridor and the rest is not. So
That is permissible. So again,
that's for the overlay district,
correct.
which will allow additional uses approximately.
Hmm.
And maybe or maybe not. Density. But then the rest of that property or property outside of that 1,000 foot or 500 foot either side, that is 1,000 spot, will be subject to the regular.
So the way the corridor overlay districts is written now, again, about architectural standards, is about any structure within 500 feet of one of the qualifying roads. And so that's where you get the district boundaries from. Density with that, I think, could get a little complicated because when you have, let's just say the Fulham property, a large parcel that's not subdivided, it's going to be difficult to calculate density on a small portion, or you'd have to subtract it from the rest of the tract. But uses for sure, you know, you could even redefine how far the corridor overlay district stretches and then tie uses to that. And you would just have to specify, you know, if the principal use or the principal use of the buildings is within this distance to the road, this is what's allowed. If it's beyond that, it defaults to the base zoning, whatever that may be.
So if you have some sort of a use that's within 500 feet of 2 acres. And there's 1,000 feet. So the rural, it's easier to keep rural outside of that. Uses that might be allowed inside.
Would it be a mixed use? You talking about inside the court?
Where you have mix of uses. Yeah, so the MRNU, maybe not, we may want to change all that zoning to the MR, whatever we call it. And then inside that corridor,
right.
allow some additional uses, I would say.
Which then, in your example of just a linear corridor, where you'd have to have, I would think, within that corridor, more density, because it would cut off somebody would own land inside the corridor and outside the corridor if it was linear. So it might require that, in other words, I'm just make up something, there's 5 acres, 1 acre is in the corridor or out, you might allow for more density because it's right on the highway and it's cutting somebody's 5 acres up. But my thought last time, and still is whether there's, no matter whether there's a dwelling or business of any kind, you know, the rural nature is the space between, not what the building is, right? And so, you know, and I know Michael's addressed, you know, not having to do everything one density, but whether it's a business, whether it's a home, it's the land between those buildings that you know, leads to the rural nature of the area.
Yeah, you're kind of hitting on one of the thoughts I've been having because I understand the reason why the corridor makes sense to have a different maybe more use allowed, but particularly if we're focused on this stretch between Schoolhouse and Boylston to the southern tip of Mills River, it seems like that's also the area in particular where we're not, you know, I think if we were kind of just being frank about it, that's the area where if it could be basically preserved in some respect
As
to what it
residential,
that's
right.
I think if we could just, you know, wave a wand and make it work, it seems like that's actually what people want to preserve, is not that there would be within 500 feet some small commercial retail developments all along that stretch where there is not now, but more that we're able to kind of maintain the character of that particular area of Mills River, and maybe it's, you know, behind. I mean, I think it's really interesting for me, at least, like the property where the Amazon warehouse is on the, you know, it's this huge thing, and yet because it still has some border of trees around it, it almost like I almost wonder, is it like that we need to have some frontage that is what is protected, and maybe putting that into the conversation, because I think there are ways for these uses to be had regardless of whether they're quote inside or just outside. But it's more about how can we have that development be and also maintain that quality of openness that I think is what we all love about once we hit 280, we make that left and you're going down that way, right? That's the part that feels, I haven't been here as long as the rest of you, but that's the part that feels like this is what we have left. So what can we do to keep it?
I agree. This corridor overlay, I mean, that's just the southern part of town. It goes around all the main
Sure.
roads in town. That's, am I remembering correctly, that is just for architectural guidance on anything within that overlay, correct? Okay.
Correct. Non-residential buildings within 500 feet of the road.
Okay. But all the mixed use uses that are listed are all can happen anywhere, including
And
that
some of
area.
them already, I mean, there's, you know, a car dealership
Right.
there. There's a, you know, there's there's farm stands along that.
Right.
You know, there are people that have businesses along that stretch of 280. It's just that that's a density, I guess, that goes to the density question. They're not strip malls. I mean, I think that's really one of the things that I think if we were all just, that would be something we don't want to see is,
I mean,
or if there's going to be a big ceramics factory, that it's set back a little more, maybe with a bunch of trees in front of it or something.
no, I mean, I agree with you. I'd love to see all of that. I mean, there are businesses there now. I know all of that and so forth.
Right.
But, you know, if the 2040 map which isn't a zoning map, I understand, but, you know, is rural residential, and we create MRRA, then that's what it should be. I mean, you have dense businesses packed in other parts of town, but outside of any town, I don't care about any other town, but Mills River, you know, it should be rural. I mean, it should be rural. And so,
and yeah, so the other corridors that exist, it may be that this corridor is different than the other corridors. I know we sort of started with this
and
one, but
we have the ability to adjust corridors on different roads, I assume, correct?
Yeah, it's just more language. So I mean,
Yeah.
if we wanted to just target this area, it would be either additional language to the existing corridor overlay district, basically identifying this part of Boylston specifically, and then the regulations attached to that. Or, you know, there is the option to do another overlay district that, you know, maybe the corridor overlay, we specifically name it for architectural standards, and then maybe there is a rural corridor overlay district that specifically addresses uses. And then the other thing I heard was building spacing, which again can be addressed through building setbacks. So again, we have in mixed use, we have the standard setbacks across the town of 30 feet off side or rear property lines, 60 feet off the front, 75 if it's Boylston. But again, I'm just saying if you wanted it to be more rural or more spacing, those can be different in the overlay.
I mean, towns across the history of this country were dense because of, you know, the inability to travel distances based on what we had, you know, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, whatever. But that's beautiful as well when you leave town and so forth. So that's not a transportation issue now, but yeah, we need to preserve that as rural as much as possible. It's hard without swatting a hornet's nest to, yeah, and the protection of a 90-day or 180-day, you know, moratorium,
I
you know,
think-
to really talk about, you know, things in more detail. Because I do think there are ways. When I bought the property that I bought in the neighborhood I bought, there wasn't you know, a land development company who came in, bought all the lots, built all the homes, you know, created the price of that home, right? It was a lot you bought. When you could save up to build a house, you build a house. And so I don't know if less density or larger lots wouldn't create that. It wouldn't be as appealing to a land development company to come in if the spacing was, I'm not recommending this, I'm giving you an example, but if it was 3 acres, right, then it's not as appealing.
But-
And so I think there are some ways to both meet the rural nature of the community and maybe make it affordable for somebody somewhere just to buy a lot rather than.
I think we gotta remember the people that own that land along like 280 that have invested in it, that's counting it being commercial, and they probably pay more taxes being along 280, and we wouldn't wanna restrict them, to a certain amount, you know. We gotta find a happy medium somewhere and not, hurt these people.
Well, no matter what, it's going to negatively affect somebody. And again, that's where what is the priority? Is it the rural nature? Is it the maximize the profit for the current landowners, or because those two definitely don't go together. So I know you're not saying that. I'm sorry, but
I like the idea of kind of straightening up the boundaries and having a certain distance out, like from 280. And that way it could, you know, like Michael said, it could be deemed something else past that boundary, you know, like say it was 500 yards or whatever. It'd have to be looked at differently beyond that, reduce it down.
well, if we make larger lot sizes, acre and a half, or whatever, there's a lot of people who purchase something somewhere in Mills River or anywhere in the country, felt like, well, I'm gonna buy this and speculate that this will be worth more at some point in the future.
Yeah.
But that's speculation. That's, you know, it's not a right.
Or is it an investment? Some people don't.
It is, but it's an investment on speculating that it may be worth more in the future because there's commercial development headed that way, but that's still a chance they take when they do that. And again, now I'm beating the hornet's nest, but that's,
Whereas if we do a MRRA, then we'll restrict what uses.
That was just what I heard at the last meeting was having some allowance. Again, I think the most important thing for me at the staff level is having a district, even if it does allow more retail commercial uses, but with an actual permitted use list. Because like Mr. Foster said, there's some things we don't want,
right.
and we need those identified instead of right now just having it be an open bag, basically, with everything allowed.
So just that whole area south, west of Crossroads, well, not Crossroads, the community center. Schoolhouse Road, south. That whole area for zone MRRA. But within 500 feet of some commercial use, same parcel size, maybe an acre. And have those part of it. So if we run the west trees buffering instead of necessarily just the building. We keep residential or residential water.
Right.
In that corridor closer to 280, where you've already got noise, you've already got mixed type use with permitted uses. That might be sort of in that area we're all kind of wanting to go. But the lot size is still for debate. We understand C280 changed the world. Keep it as rural looking as possible through buffering and larger parcels. Outside of that, we want to discourage that. Because if you want real commercial use, you don't want it out. You want at least your sign build and soon. Sorry, I can't remember. We don't permit off-premise signs. So sign out on 280, say turn left here, come by your cat sweater, yes.
I did not see that in any of these. The cat sweater factory. But
It's just a dream I have.
and how big is the? I got. Right. Well, the further we go in this discussion, yeah, we're going to need some of the asbestos suit, but.
We don't have off-premise signs, therefore, it doesn't seem to me, that I would want to have a real commercial business outside of it. So there might be some things, we don't strip. There's places for strip malls. But.
I mean, we a year ago voted for the ability to build a bike path, I think, from the county line at some point, all the way to, the heart of the Mills River. And other than that, you can get in a vehicle and drive anywhere. I'm just saying, if it's rural residential, I wouldn't want to see anything other than a rural residence in rural residence. That's what's the rural nature of. Yeah. Does that lessen the value of a piece of property on that road, right on that road? I don't know. I think if that's that appealing, someone wants to live in that area, they may buy that same piece of property that otherwise would have had a business built on it and build a residence on it. So,
What is down the road?
right.
Ensure that investment in gamble like
Right.
like to pick the section working. Be in that section. We can't do them all at one time.
I mean, you could literally say, we're not doing this, but you could literally say, we could have a discussion. I'm just making up the number, but lot size no less than an acre and a half, and then take the description of the rural residential in the planning map, and then, which describes things verbiage wise, but then add detail to it. You could send it on to the town council. You could do that in a few minutes, but we probably want to debate it more than that, so. Well, are we not focused just on what's Mills River mixed use, right? Isn't that what this focus is, or are we talking about all zones?
I think the discussion started again with that annexation. So
Yeah.
First it started with the inconsistency of, again, where does mixed use overlap with rural residential?
Right.
And again,
Right.
going back to that map, it's quite a large portion of the town, including our west
Right.
side and northwest side. But again, I think to Ms. Marino's point, the southern part of the town is where we're seeing a little more focus in terms of development. Again,
Sure.
along the corridor.
Well, yeah.
So I don't quite remember how we got to this point, but this was the first large chunk that I think the board decided to tackle.
Would we have the ability to propose to the town council creating a new district, Mills River Residential MRRA? I can't remember what all the letters were. And to say the rural residential map for the 2040 plan, overlay that, and that's a new district called MRRA, and then we can zone that and create density for that, those two things.
You could create a new zoning district, but again, rural residential, because it's not zoning, it's just future land use category, probably overlaps with some other zoning districts now. But in theory,
That'd be
yes,
a start,
you
then you could, but in other words, we could use that as a start to create a new district, and then obviously if it overlaps in something that's not mixed use, we would carve that out. That would give it, so I think the first step is create that area that we want to focus on, then talk about density, and then along with that, uses.
Get rid of MRE. Change that.
Well, okay, right, instead of the 2040 map, could just change MRMU to,
Where does MRE change? But if it's in that corridor, we allow additional uses.
well, that would be a discussion. It depends, maybe not south of, in that area there, so.
Really, we're just not happy with MRE.
Or density.
Yeah. Yeah. What that does, that opens up.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Where they grew up, where the food to form. So by getting rid of MRMU, it's in the interest.
So would we, again, so you can literally make a motion, I'm assuming that you want to focus on the density and the use in the Mills River mix.
Just give me direction. Yeah, just, you can
Well, I don't mean
provide.
literally tonight, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I don't mean tonight, but I'm saying that's where we would head, is looking at for Mills River mixed use, density and usage.
And we would be recommending council, where it's MRMU now, it would be changed. Which comes with under density. It would be nice to have, people come here, give us their thoughts, especially if you're It would really be nice with email.
Yeah, the input.
Yeah, it would be nice, cause I'd like to know what your thoughts are.
What do you think about like maybe 50% of like the north end of this card, start with it, and maybe move up to the south end after that, you know, instead of trying to go all the way to the south end.
Well, this is just one portion of Mills River mixed use anyway, right?
Correct.
And that's just the corridor overlay of the southern part of the town, so.
Would you be willing to do one with, say, 500 foot either side of 280, and as the overlay? Discussion tonight, do we want to kind of settle the density? I'm leaning more towards 1 per acre, if that's.
Yeah, I'd like to have a moratorium. I'd like to have a moratorium because the more intense this discussion gets, and if there's proposals for larger lot size, that's gonna affect a lot of people who have interest in that. And we need
Well,
to
if
have
you
the,
don't have utilities, you gotta have at least an acre and a half
Yeah.
before you build them. No outside utilities.
That's fine. So I mean, again, we already have the existing corridor overlay map, so what I'll most likely do is take that, focus on the southern portion of town, and then are you asking for the number of parcels that would be included?
No,
Or-
that's
Okay,
a lot of work. Just have it where we can zoom in
got it.
and just kind of follow that, see if the parcels.
Yeah, we can do that.
And, so if you don't have utilities, what's the minimum lot size? Really? Right now, 30,000 square feet,
Oh, per town regulation? Yes, yes.
but practically with septic.
Yeah, the health department requires, don't you have to have about an acre and a half to have a well and a septic tank? on
Yeah,
one?
it depends. Of course, it's property dependent, so, I don't know the environmental health regulations, but I believe it's 100-foot setback from well to septic, so it depends what kind of soil you have, where that is. So it's really property dependent, but yeah, at some point you do need a lot larger property size to accommodate both private on-site utilities.
Although I think it's worth keeping in mind that that's all dependent on present day and not necessarily bearing on the future when the access to utilities is different. So something that we're talking about today, which doesn't have access to utilities, could in the future, so. Right.
That's what I was gonna bring up next, so that would have to be a council action, and I'll have to do some research. I'll come back with some more information for you on that, because there are some protections in state law about what you can apply a moratorium to.
my understanding was around the tiny home park at the south end of town in the past with the use of a moratorium, so.
A Coney Bell. Oh,
Moratorium involved after.
Okay. All right,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd like to, again, if we start debating that in the south end of town or anything in the Mills River mixed use that we're thinking of, we're throwing around numbers and it's double or more of the current, lot size, then, staff's gonna get inundated with requests, to develop. And so we need to have, a moratorium. Yeah, so I'd like to know that sooner rather than later, but.
business, no.
I think it'd be really based on what the state, land use law constraints are allowed. So I've done that research before, so I'll pull up that information.
It just gives us the ability to put it all out there and come up with a solution.
Have a little time,
Right.
not rush to a solution just because Washington State.
Well, I just don't want it to be a race between what we want to try to do to preserve Mills River versus those who may not feel the same way, so.
Emails are great.
You could throw a big number out there today and there would be some involvement.
Well, when it goes to council, I'm sure there will be people that show up. You know, we'd like to hear that up front. so
Sure.
we can,
Yeah.
address it before it goes to council. When he presents council, he has to. Any more discussions for tonight? Where we're at. Make sure we've got clear direction for you.
I'm always going to summarize. So we'll come back with a more specific corridor overlay map so we can zoom in on what properties might be affected on that southern part of town. And then I'll do that moratorium research as well. for
Yeah,
next
because I
meeting.
think we need to try to have something to send to council as a result of our next meeting on a moratorium, whatever is allowed,
Mhm.
so.
And I'll give them a report. Next meeting. We'll discuss it. Sir, now, somewhere between an acre and a half, 2 acres, somewhere in there. Whether board take the whole board without a motion, just say where y'all meeting.
Sure, I mean,
I'm thinking an acre, but
If
not really gonna. Not really gonna hurt people want to go an acre and a half.
well, I tried to research rural, what makes up a rural community or whatever. 98,455,000 hits I got on Google, just didn't help, but I would ask ask you to drive around the community in different developments. Some of them are 3 acre, lots, some of them are less than that, and get a sense of what you think is rural, and what's not. And so that's just the way that I would approach it, because I mean, yeah, yeah, yeah. There you go. Yeah. No, fortunately. Oh, I'd say at least acre. Well, what is it that Brian said? He's adamant, no less than an acre and a half. I mean, I agree with that. I would say that'd be kind of a minimum. So
Good to have one for.
you can have more than one, right?
One without,
Right.
something like that.
One in the corridor, one without. Outside that corridor, acre. No, it doesn't make sense to have different lot sizes.
But you could have lot sizes. Again, with the density, it just gets complicated because the parcels aren't subdivided. So if someone wanted to put a house next to the road, but they've got acreage, it just gets complicated with the density calculation.
When you have utilities, it's where it gets very dense because, you got water, sewer, and they squeeze as many houses as they can on an acre of land.
I agree. I think the other,
That's my minimum. not my
yeah,
maximum, so.
I would definitely feel, I think the other, and maybe this goes to uses as well, but, I still would say if it was spaced an acre or an acre and a half apart, and we're talking like thing, 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 then I feel like we still wouldn't have accomplished necessarily what we're setting out to accomplish. So that might go to the uses, but I think that's one concern that sort of jumps in my mind already about this lot size question. But yeah, and it sort of still creates that, but it's that breaking up, I think, even along the 280 corridor. But anyways, I feel like in order to really dive and dig into, and I also think there's a question of, you know, talking about the reality, the compromise, and the vision of, you know, and those are not necessarily the same things. You know, where we'll end up versus, you know, if we were all talking freely about what it is that we would see. Right. So,
But there wasn't any of these requirements built into that vision, was there, that map? Yeah. But the words rural residential, they just jump out at me. And so, anyway, I won't beat
Yeah.
a dead horse, in rural. But anyway, you put a number out there, 1.5, you'll get feedback from council and you kind of get a sense of where they stand, you know. Yeah, that's kind of a minimum, but yeah, I mean, to me, yeah, that's just a starting thought. Starting thought, yeah. You'll kind of see where everybody stands. So. Speaking to the reality of it.
Pretty sure that's pretty much a health department requirement. That they're the high outside utility.
Yeah.
You know, we got to have a well and septic tank. I know in my subdivision where I live, I wish there was more land around it. I mean, High Vista, there's like 8 homes, 2 acres, you know, because it has water and sewer.
And where we live, where there was no well or septic, it wouldn't perk, so they had to create 3 and 5 acre lots, and so. But to your point, in the future, those things can change. You know. Right next to the barn.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for the good discussion. Yeah, Michael, if you've got good direction, then we'll move on. And assuming we haven't had any comment come in while we're talking. See, check Facebook. Any additional items or comments? Well, I'll make a comment. How much I appreciate town staff and Steph doing hard work on this. As always.
Absolutely. Second that.
All right, so now, staff up.
Just really briefly, we did receive the second round of plans, or the revised plans for the shopping center, and they're all compliant, so we're moving towards issuing that zoning permit later this week, early next week. And then I just did want to remind you, since we're talking about all these code updates, zoning updates, that we do still have the UDO project out there. We've reviewed some consultants and are looking at a top choice, and hopefully we'll move forward with that shortly. But again, just wanted to put that into context, because again, we can tackle the southern part of town or begin moving towards adopting something like that now. But I really think the time when we could look at the town as a whole will come with that UDO project, because the consultants we're looking at will manage public input. You know, we've already talked about, just like the park master plan did, sending a postcard out to every resident in the town. So that will be part of the UDO and land use update project. That's all I have.
You might have to have public input now.
I'll second.
Aye.
Aye.